This podcast is supported by Wesleyan Financial Services, providers of specialist financial advice to members of the legal profession. Wesleyan's team of dedicated experts have been helping law firms and their employees achieve financial well-being over many years, providing personal and commercial financial advice, in-firm seminars and online guidance. Strategic partners with the Law Society, Wesleyan is proud of its partnership with Women in the Law UK. For more information about Wesleyan, visit wesleyan.co.uk, or to arrange a financial education event in your firm or a no-obligation financial health check, connect with Sarah Deacon, Wesleyan Area Manager, on LinkedIn.
Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of Talking Law from Women in the Law UK. I'm Sally Penni, MBE, a barrister at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester, the Joint Vice Chair of Association of Women Barristers and the founder of Women in the Law UK. Do find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Women in the Law UK. Today you'll hear my conversation with Andrew Powell. Andrew is a barrister at 4 Paper Buildings who specialises in the international movement of children, surrogacy and fertility law, as well as adoption and child protection. In 2019, he appeared in the Supreme Court as junior counsel in the matter of XY, a landmark case. He is also the author of the book A Practical Guide on the Law in Relation to Surrogacy. I started the interview by asking Andrew about what he was wearing.
It's a Ruth Bader Ginsburg t-shirt that I've had for a number of years. Obviously, she passed away a few weeks ago, and I'm sipping a cup of Yorkshire tea from my I Dissent mug. So I've got the spirit of RGB with me here for this afternoon's little talk.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the first time we met, and I'll go back to starting from your beginnings in a moment, but the first time you met, you were wearing a t-shirt at the Bar Council. I think you were speaking, or was I speaking? I think you were speaking. And I'm getting all my speaking stuff mixed up, but I'm sure it was you. And you were wearing a t-shirt that said, everyone should be a feminist. And obviously you're a man. And I just want to maybe start from there. Why were you wearing that t-shirt, and how important is it to have allies in men and black men?
Well, so I think it was the November 2019 annual bar conference. So Lady Hale was giving one of her last keynote speeches as president of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And the We Should All Be Feminist motto comes from a TED talk that one of my favourite authors, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, gave a TED talk saying we should all be feminists.
Yes.
And I thought it was an appropriate t-shirt to wear to one of Lady Hale's last conferences, because actually, if we're looking at, women retention at the bar, it requires everybody to kind of participate in it. It's not just a women's problem, it's everyone's problem. So it's men as well. And so I really wanted to wear that to say, I'm an ally in the sense of, we've got to all work together. I think, I recently did a survey about working hours and, changing the process of when we should be working, particularly at the family bar. And one of the questions was, what will the impact be on you if you have to work, earlier court hearings or later court hearings? I said, on me personally, not much really, because I don't have any dependents. It'd be fine. But I'll be quite bored of seeing all these men, because the people who are going to be impacted are going to be women. So I don't want to be, working all these hours and seeing the same faces. We need to have a diverse bar. If we're going to achieve that, we need to have some sense of equality, and it's not going to be equal if we've got a system where the people who are disproportionately impacted by these changes then can't practice.
Yes, absolutely. Well, what a great place to start then. Andrew, can you tell me, for you, why law, and how did you end up being, one of the few men successfully practicing at the family bar? I mean, I know some others and some other colleagues from my former chambers, but how did you end up in law?
So as a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And I should say my parents, they're not pushy parents. They're classic immigrants from Jamaica who wanted their kids to be happy but to do good. So, you could be a rubbish collector or working in a shop, and as long as you're, contributing to society, that's basically what my parents wanted us to do. So there was no kind of airs or graces about what we were going to do. But I wanted to be a doctor. My mum's a nurse, so I saw her going to the hospital all the time. But that's kind of what I want to do. Realised I wasn't very good at science, and that might be a bit of a drawback. But I was much better at arts subjects. I liked arguing, so I planned to read law at university. Had an interview at Cambridge. I didn't get in. The place, I think I had a place at Bristol, and I missed one of the grades in my A-levels and thought, you know what, I'm not going to go to my backup choice. I'm going to go through clearing, and I'll have a punt at another subject. So I got offered a place at Durham and Manchester to read anthropology. And I thought, you know what, Manchester seems pretty cool. And I grew up in Birmingham, so I thought, you know what, I'm not going to stay in Birmingham, I'm not going to go to London, I'm going to go to Manchester. And, studying anthropology, it's all about people. So the role of the anthropologist, a social anthropologist, is, I think, or part of the role is to be the advocate for the unspoken voice. It translates so well into law, or plainly, because that's often what we're doing in the courtroom. And a lot of this work we did on kinship in Manchester, I have to say, I think there's often this kind of esoteric view about anthropology that you're studying about witchcraft and weird and wonderful unheard of tribes, which sometimes is the case. But the part of the curriculum at Manchester was a lot about Euro-American ideas about conception and what a family is and kinship. And so it kind of drove me into this interest in surrogacy, which is now kind of one of my big kind of specialisms.
Yes.
And it really kind of fortified my kind of wish to actually work with people. It confirmed I did not want to be a chancery or a commercial barrister or be a solicitor and work in the city. I wanted to work with people because I like people, and we're all nosy. It's quite interesting to kind of find out about what makes people tick and then go and argue their case in court.
Yes. And what about family law? I alluded to it before. There's a silk I know very well called Kumbe Kaney, Queen's Counsel. He specialised in FGM. He's I'll show his age, really, because he was very successful when I was a pupil, and he was one of the barristers that looked after me. And then even then, he was one of the few men practicing in family law. Stephen Wildblood, who's on the bench, he was from our chambers then. How did you end up in family law as opposed to crime? I know you said, if chancery wasn't for you or commercial bar, there are so many different areas of law, aren't there? So why family, and how did you come to be, so established and succeeding so well in family law?
Well, success is an odd thing to measure. I don't know about that, but I'll leave that to others. But I think in terms of family law, it's interesting, and it's actually a really relevant question to perhaps some of the things we'll talk about later about diversity and visibility at the bar. But
yes.
When I was at Manchester, my undergraduate dissertation was all about neonatal medicine and personhood and the extent to which babies who are born on the cusp of viability are people. So very kind of, again, it sounds quite esoteric, but it was interesting from a medical anthropology point of view. And one of the barristers who had appeared in a withdrawing treatment case in 2004-5 was a barrister known as Barbara Mills, as she then was, now Barbara Mills QC.
Yes.
And so I looked her up and thought, what chambers is she at? And that's how I came across 4PB. And I think at that time, I was still quite interested in crime, employment, immigration. So still quite interested in that general common law practice. And
yes.
I did loads of crime mini pupilages, and I loved being in the Crown Court. But I knew I wanted to venture off into other areas. And I think I did a mini pupilage at a couple of other sets. There are some sets where I just felt I'm almost put off being at the bar because I don't feel comfortable here. And so actually, when I came to apply for pupilages, I didn't apply to very many family sets. I actually applied to mainly common law sets. And 4PB was one of the few family sets I applied to because I knew of, I didn't know Barbara Mills, but I knew of her. And I thought, gosh, they sound like an interesting set. And she looks like somebody who looks like me. I'll apply there. And in the end, I was very fortunate. I got offered pupillage before I was at bar school, and I got offered pupillage at 4PB and another two sets. The other two sets were common law sets. And I decided to go for 4PB. So I just became a family specialist. Not just, but I am a family specialist.
Yes.
And then I suppose, with family law, it's quite a broad topic, discipline anyway. And I've kind of very quickly subspecialised in just doing children work exclusively, both public law children and private law children. And I suppose now my practice is I've got a fairly healthy mix of a bit of public law, so publicly funded work, child protection work, inquiry work, and then kind of the international movement of children, so children crossing borders with parents where there's a dispute over where the child should live. And as I say, this kind of subspecialism in fertility and surrogacy work, where it's fascinating, and often you're dealing with very sensitive issues because sometimes you're assisting a client try to achieve parental recognition.
Yes.
Often when they've had a very traumatic journey to parenthood, they may have gone through miscarriages, they may have gone through IVF treatment, adoption,
yes.
and they come to surrogacy. And, the look on their face when you get to that final hearing of a parental order being made and, the state is saying, this is now your child, you are their parent. It's quite significant. And I mean, it's very rare, actually, I think, in family law to always have that feel-good moment, because there's often this distinction, isn't there, in law about, did you win the case? Did you lose the case? And I always think with family law, if you're in family court, no one's really winning because it's not great. But there are those cases where actually this is quite a good feel, and you're providing a solution and a conclusion to something which is significant, and it's a transformative order, as all the judges say. So you're part of that process, and it's when they have a celebration hearing, they have a photo with the judge.
Yes.
Sometimes they ask you to be in the photo as well, and that's quite moving as well, because you're thinking, gosh, this child, when they're 6 months old in a pushchair now, but when they're 17, they'll see my mug in court, whatever, in the West Green building.
Yes, why?
trying to smile. But I mean, it's a bit difficult now with lockdown. I've not had any in-person hearings like that recently. They've all been online. But no, it's a fascinating area, and it's a real privilege as well, I think, to specialise in family law, because you're dealing with people who are often experiencing the most horrible things in their life. And you're, as I say, you're there to provide a solution. And so it's humbling and a privilege, because you're often party to some of the most sensitive issues that they've never spoken about to their family, to their colleagues, but and sometimes you're going to court and meeting them for the first time.
Yes.
And you have to have this ability to develop a rapport and get them to trust you, to be able to then give you the information for you to go into the courtroom and try and find a solution and argue their case. So it's a privilege. And I think if you'd asked me maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was 6 years cool and was a bit unsure whether I was doing the right thing, I don't know what answer I would have given you, but certainly now at 12, 13 years cool, I can say, actually, I'm really proud of what I do. And actually, one of the things I think that lockdown has really brought into sharp focus is what we do at the bar as barristers. At the very beginning, back in March, April, we were looking at key workers and what is a key worker.
Yes.
And I think sometimes there's been this tendency in the bar for there to be this hierarchy of prestige about what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm quite proud to say I'm a family lawyer, because I know what it's like to be going to a courtroom or going to a court building, and you're dealing with a 15-year-old who might be being placed in secure accommodation, having their liberty taken away from them, or going to court and dealing with a young parent who might have their child removed from them. And these are, you can't really teach that at law school.
No.
It's a very kind of on the job thing you have to develop. And so, as I say, I think one of the things which lockdown has demonstrated is that there's been this necessity to ensure that crime, immigration, family lawyers, society needs us regardless of what's happening on the outside.
Yes.
And I feel quite proud to be part of that.
Part of it. It's been quite a reflective process, hasn't it, for all of the bar and in our profession, really. Andrew, can I ask you this, really? You're very clearly very passionate about the work you do, and indeed so am I. I wonder, did you have role models? You know, I know you said your mother was a nurse. You're from Birmingham. Were you educated by the state? You know, where did your passion come or inspiration come from?
It's interesting. I went to like a really big state school in Birmingham, where I suppose the expectation of young people to go on to university wasn't huge, but it was aspirational.
Yes.
So there's very much encouragement, you know, aim high, do the best you can. And I suppose role model wise, and it's cliche, but I think it's important because the people who I saw all the time were my parents. And they were role models in their own way of, I didn't have a particularly, comfortable upbringing, but they always provided for us. And I think I recognized that it was important to have some kind of craft, some kind of vocation. And even though my parents were like, you can do whatever you want, I think in my mind, I was like, well, actually, I want to be able to support myself as well financially. That's the obvious kind of role models that my parents, like my dad, you know, I remember there was a time when, and my mum recounts it to me all the time, that there was a moment when my dad's an electrical engineer and he often did quite big jobs in London. And so he would sometimes be in London for like in the week and we'd come back home on a Friday. And he came back one Friday and, he came in and I was about 5 and I said to him, I want to word with you. I said, when you left on Monday morning, you went out so quickly, you nearly pushed me down the stairs. You didn't see me. And my mum said, it's like, you know, who did you think you were? You're like this precocious 5-year-old, like, you know, reprimanding your dad. I was like, well, you know, you always taught us to like speak our own mind. And, you know, we had a very kind of, you know, we'd always have a Sunday dinner together where we'd always have the 4 of us, and my sister, myself and my parents would always have dinner together. And sometimes the news would be on in the background. And if it was in the week and Dad was home, we would, you know, would watch the news, and there'd be discussion at the dinner table about what was going on in the world. And so, you know, my childhood is punctuated by political events of, you know, Thatcher resigning, the Berlin Wall coming down, the Iraq War, because it was punctuated by the dinner table because the news would be on.
Yes.
And so that kind of generated a sense of your voice is there to be heard. You're not just a child. You can participate in adult discussions. So I suppose that's one element. The second one, I suppose, is teachers. There were a couple of teachers who I had who were very influential in pushing me. And I had quite a difficult time at school initially, and without it feeling like my personal therapy session. I think when I was 11, I got bullied quite badly at the first secondary school I went to. I think to the extent where I think looking back now with my kind of my public law hat on as a children lawyer, I think I would have probably met the threshold for CAMS. Like I was a pretty sad kid, 11 and 12, and my parents were very proactive in, you know, challenging the school. So you're not, you know, he's being bullied and you're not dealing with this, and removed me from the school. And I went to a new school where it was fine for a while and it started happening again. And it was very difficult, and I had a really difficult journey. And I think it was only when I got to like 15, 16 where I kind of found myself.
Yeah.
But there were a few teachers in sixth form who were really, really important in pushing me. And I think, you know, teachers do an amazing job at, you know, basically holding things together. And I mean, gosh, if lockdown hasn't taught us anything, again, you know, these people who are key to our future were really important in shaping me. So I think my parents, you know, a couple of teachers, and I think professionally it's really difficult because actually the thing is we have social media now, which means it's much more accessible.
Yes, I'm going to come to that. Yeah.
And I think in the early noughties, when I was going off to university in 2001, 2002, and, you know, social media wasn't around as much then, or not at all really. So you didn't really see people unless you actually went out and searched for them. You read a case and you looked up who they were.
Yes.
So it's a bit harder. I mean, there was one person who my aunt put me in touch with, who was a criminal barrister, who I then wrote, and she knew him because she went to had salsa classes with another barrister's wife, and so it was a really tenuous link. And I was just like, can I just write to him? And she was like, fine, write to him. And so that was how I did a couple of criminal mini pupillage in the early, back in 2001, 2002. And that again, that was helpful because that was somebody who then was a bit like, well, if you don't want to do crime, you need to look at other areas. So, or not just don't want to do crime, but you don't want to just do crime. You want to do perhaps a general common law pupillage, look at other things. I suppose that was very, very helpful as well.
Fantastic. Andrew, I want to ask you, is there a case that sticks in your mind? I love asking this because one expects people to say the great and the good. And often it's the first case we ever did. Even now, 20 years on, I can still remember, and I dare say Barbara Mills, who's 30 years called today as we record this, Queen's Counsel, will still remember her first case, and indeed when she comes on. Can you remember sort of the case that's, I don't know if most meaningful is the right word, but is there a case that sticks in your mind that you can still remember now?
I'd say it's not the ones that you would have seen, that are on Twitter or in the law reports.
No.
I mean, there are two that stick out in my mind. I mean, if I may just quickly use both of them. The first one, I think I was only probably just a tenant, so very early in my career, where a child was being removed from, or children were being removed from their parents, and they were, I think, 3 or 4 children, and the children were brought to court by the parents. I think the parents knew the children were going to be removed, and the parents themselves had a extremely traumatic background and had arrived in this country as refugees, and they'd suffered torture where they'd come from, and it was horrible. The court sanctioned the removal of the children. That was expected. And I just remember hearing the wailing of the mother in the court waiting area as social workers took the children away, which is very rare to happen because it doesn't often happen like that at court. Yeah. And it was quite harrowing to hear that. And I was acting for the local authority. So I had been the person, who was effectively prosecuting the case, to bring a case to say, this is why we've got concerns. And it was horrendous. And I could remember hearing the shouting of the mother. It was quite dark. And I think that had a lasting impact on me, and it still does now, actually, even talking about it, because actually you realize the responsibility with which you are charged. And even though it's not me making the decision, it's the judge, he or she has to make that decision, or magistrates. Sometimes it's magistrates who make these decisions. But it's still, you're part of that system. And obviously it's for the better good, because if they're going to be suffering harm, it's better that they're removed. But this is still a family. And I think it's important to remember that kind of sense of humanity, that they are still people, they're still parents, and that's still their children. And the second case, again, it wasn't I think I was still very junior. And again, it's a public law case where, and I remember it vividly, I was representing a parent. They again brought the child to court. It was a baby. And she just said, I just can't, she was very young. So I just can't do this. And just gave me the baby. I have the baby in the staircase in my arms. I was just looking for help, and the social worker, my client, she ran off, and the social worker took hold of the child, and it was just like, wow, that's kind of so sad, so sad. I mean, there are other cases that I could go on, but
I know.
It's the cases that have the human element where they have a profound impact. And as I say, the cases that are reported, often they are very significant, and they've been, great outcomes, or they've been significant for that particular family. But the ones that have a lasting impact are those ones where it goes deep in terms of the kind of what it does in terms of your sense of where you are in the world, actually. Because, that could easily have been me if it wasn't for a few lucky ways along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to ask you, please, about diversity. Now, you are an openly gay man. I'm hesitating because I was going to say an openly gay feminist. It doesn't sound quite right, does it? You are a feminist.
That's not right.
Yeah. But, and I really wanted to ask you, one, when you decided to be open in the workplace about that. And then I'd like to ask you, please, if I may, about what you think about diversity. We're both Black. I'm a woman, but we can have intersectionality and allies. Are we doing better in the legal profession? And what else can we do better?
Okay, on the first question about being open about my sexuality, it's never really been a question, really. I was called to the bar when I was 24. I started pupillage straight away.
Yes.
And it wasn't really anything which I wasn't uncomfortable with. So that wasn't an issue. Yeah. So that was quite a straightforward one, really, I suppose. I think in terms of diversity, there is gradual change, but it's slow, and more needs to be done. And I think there's a really great phrase which I've adopted from a friend of mine called Dr. Ronks, and they are a a medical doctor, but they also work as a children's presenter on CB.
Oh, yes,
Operating out, and they are great.
Yeah, I love them.
And they have a phrase that is, you cannot be what you do not see. And it's so right, because representation is critical if you want to facilitate change. And it's the engine of change, because if you don't see somebody who looks like you, then it makes it harder to try and see yourself in that profession. And I think, the example I gave you earlier with Barbara Mills demonstrates that, I think. There's often this cliche of the bar, it's not really a cliche because it's true, of the bar where, you have people who have gone to schools where they have massive dining tables and massive grand halls. They go to universities that have massive dining tables and grand halls. And they go to the Inns of Court and have massive dining tables and grand halls. And it's all the same thing to them. If you don't come from that background, it can feel intimidating. So it's important that you see other people that look like you. I've just been very lucky that I've been selected as one of the inaugural participants of the Bar Leadership Programme.
Fantastic.
And, I was ambivalent about applying. And, a couple of people in Chambers were very, very supportive, saying, Andrew, why aren't you applying for this? You should apply for it. And I did. And, and one of the things which it made me reflect on in the application process was, I remember going to Cumberland Lodge, being very reluctant to go to Cumberland Lodge at all, because it is just, I find it really stuffy. And I can't bear it. And somebody said to me in Chambers, if you don't go, you not going, there'll be people who are going there who feel the same way, but have to go because they're at bar school.
Yes.
And if you felt like that at bar school, there'll be somebody else who feels like you as well. So the change comes from within. And I thought, actually, you're right. If I don't go, it'll be the same stuffy people that they see all the time. So
yes.
I went along, and it was just, I was teaching on an ethics course. And, at the dinner, there were a group of young black men who I went up to and said, hey, how are you? And I think they thought I was a student as well.
You're lucky thing. Yes, it's because you're not grey yet, unlike me, now.
It's getting there. And and they said, oh, it's so great you're here because, it feels so weird being in this space, and it's great that you're here as well. I thought, actually, that was really, it just proved the point, didn't it? That actually you need to be there, and the visibility is critical. Yes. I think on the intersectionality point, I think it's so important because we tend to kind of compartmentalize things into, well, it's gender, sexuality, but you've got to look at the whole, you've got to look at it holistically. There are elements of the bar where, and we talk about privilege a lot. I think privilege is very important. I think people sometimes get offended by it, but because if you say somebody has privilege, it's not saying that they haven't suffered any kind of adversity. It just means that the colour of their skin is one fewer thing which they can be not held against them, but makes things more difficult for them.
Yes.
And so you've got to look at that from that perspective. So, it's wonderful this year in 2020 that we've had 6 black women being appointed as Silk.
Absolutely.
It's huge. I mean, it shouldn't be huge, but it is huge in every respect because, there are people there who will now look at this. There'll be young black women going, wow, that's awesome. That's great. And it's things like that that really, I think, make a difference. I think on this point of privilege, I think there's as I said earlier, people sometimes get offended by it. And, the great illustration for me about privilege was that, I think it came out during lockdown. It was a cartoon sketch in one of the broadsheets that said, people often say we're all in the same boat. But actually it's not. You're all in the same storm, but in a different boat. And, you might be in your nice your nice yacht, but I'm in a little dinghy, but we're in the same storm, but you're weathering it different because you've got the capacity to navigate it because you've got your nice yacht, but I'm in my dinghy. So it's making those it's having insight to recognize that that's an issue and making reasonable adjustments, proportionate adjustments that can then facilitate change. And so it's things like, I think we've got the bar as a profession has got to be better at going into schools and really dispelling the myth of what it is to be a barrister. I think Alexandra Wilson, Essex Barrister on Twitter, who is just awesome, has been a fantastic vehicle for highlighting this, because, all the experiences that she has had as a woman of colour, as a criminal and family barrister, going to a criminal court and being identified as a defendant. And I think the thing about that as well, actually, is that there was some of the reaction to that was of, well, she has loads of scholarships. She read PP at Oxford. That should be it shouldn't happen to her. But it's not about that. It's something which she said yesterday at a conference I attended by Zoom. And she said, black people have been over-criminalised, and therefore there's a perception about it. And we shouldn't have this element of acceptability. So if you're in a suit from Eden Ravenscroft or wherever, therefore you shouldn't be questioned about who you are or assumed to be a defendant. That's missing the point. And I think all of us have had that experience. I have it all the time. People are shocked. I've started talking about it much more openly.
Yes, me too.
In the last 6 months, since it's all been quite in your face. And I tell people, I get followed around the shops all the time by security guards, and people go, really? But even after you've been to court, I've said, it doesn't matter whether I've been to the gym, whether I'm in tracksuit and a hoodie, or whether I'm in a 3-piece suit, I get followed around all the time.
Yeah. And,
you often, in shops, sometimes you have that kind of, I call it the pretty woman moment, when you go into a shop and you just think, I'm not going to go here.
Yes.
Big mistake, huge mistake. You don't know who I am, but you're judging me because of the colour of my skin.
Yeah.
And I think, actually, it's been really important to have those conversations, because if you don't talk about it, people don't really recognise it. And as I say, I think we have to distinguish between this sense of acceptability. Well, you're in a suit, they shouldn't be following you. Like, they shouldn't be following me, period.
Yeah. I'm a professional person. Wherever I am, I should be accepted for that, and especially in my workplace. So I wholly agree with you, Andrew. But having said that, the head of the court service apologised to Alexandra, which is a first. The Supreme Court President Lord Reed is talking about, the unacceptability of black or Asian ethnic minorities in the Supreme Court publicly, so people are hearing it. So we are making waves, but what can people do? Because as you say, I've been in the bar for 20 years and I've become conditioned. It happened to be in Liverpool. Yeah, Liverpool Crown Court, you're here to pay a council tax. No. And you become conditioned about it. And now we've got platforms that we can talk about it. Do you think that's helping? Because you're quite active on Twitter, like Alexandra. Crikey. I'm just learning.
Well, I don't think I can. I don't have the same kind of readership as Alexandra, but I mean, it's important. I think actually social media does help in that way, because it really highlights the issue, and I think change is slow. It's coming, but it's very slow, and talking about it does make a difference, because people don't acknowledge there's a problem unless and until you say it's a problem. I think you're right. People have become not only conditioned, but also kind of, I suppose, desensitized to it, because you just think, well, that's par for the course. Of course I get asked, am I a defendant? Am I the social worker? Are you here to pay your council tax? Because that's the baggage you have with it. And I feel actually what Alexandra has done is really has empowered us, actually. And I think it's wonderful that somebody who's 2018 cool,
young,
in their mid-20s, who is teaching us, actually,
I know.
to do it. And I think that's wonderful, because actually there's so much to learn from that. But similarly, how do we change, there being more people of colour in silk and more people on the bench coming from people of colour? I think that, again, is a battle we all have to accept, and that means our white allies encouraging people of colour to say, you should apply for that, or being mentors. The whole profession has to tackle this. This isn't.
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah,
it's a big question, and it's a fight that isn't just for the minority groups; it's for everybody to fight. And it's almost in the same way when we were talking earlier about how I approach feminism. Yeah. It's the same thing, that it's not for women to have to continue to fight it. It's actually men have got to be allies as well, and men have got to be the part of that driving force to change it. You look at something like, say, like Lady Hale or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how they talk about their husbands, that Lady Hale's late husband,
Yes.
and how they talk about them as being, they found the right partner because they were men who supported and encouraged them professionally. And I think that's what men have to do at the bar as well with their female colleagues, because, simple things like maternity leave, it is invariably women who go on maternity leave and then come back. What can men do to help their female colleagues coming back post maternity leave to kind of help them professionally? Like we've got to acknowledge that there's a problem. And even actually, I can think of this anecdotally, actually, from friends that, people have children and then their practice might dwindle and they're not really sure what to do. And, we've all got to acknowledge that there's a problem and then address it. But you can't just talk about it. Men have got to step up to the plate and actually take action. But that's across the board, because that's not just men. That's also the clerks. That's also solicitors. It's a whole cultural change. That's what needs to happen. And I think there are shoots of change, but there's more to come.
Yes.
And much more work to be done.
Absolutely. And you're really, really quite spot on. Now, Andrew, I know how hard you work. You're in inquiries. I think you work harder than me, and I've got 3 kids. You haven't got any. You work extremely hard, and I think I'm fair in saying you're ambitious. And so I'm going to come to a question right at the end about what's next. But I wonder, what do you do for your well-being? The burnout rate is so high. We know that at the bar. And we're not great at actually looking after ourselves. And thankfully, the Bar Council, the CBA, your association, the Family Bar Association, be doing loads on well-being at the bar. And there's still room for improvement, because I still see, someone said to me, I saw you send me an email at 2 a.m. And I know. And I was like, oh yeah, hadn't occurred to me. Of course, they hadn't responded because they were, non-lawyers. So I wonder, what do you do for your well-being, or what would you like to do if you're not great like me? What do you do, or what would you like to do for your well-being?
Well, I think I'm also guilty of that 2 a.m. Maybe not 2 a.m., maybe 1 a.m. I don't really need much sleep, which is a really bad quality. And it's probably the only similarity I have to Margaret Thatcher, that I can operate on about 4 hours sleep, which is, that's not something to boast about. I mean, I'm not.
No.
And I'm conscious of the fact that I am, and my friends and, people who are close to me will say, you are actually nuts. Like you're working a lot of hours.
Yes,
I acknowledge that I do work quite hard. My downtime is exercise, and it's a really simple one. I try and exercise daily, whether that's going for a run. Quite lucky, I've got a personal trainer, so I go and see them. I've started cycling, so in lockdown,
gosh, you're not even middle age.
I used to cycle in London when I first started, and I stopped around about 2013 because I was doing lots of public law cases where I had 5 lever arch files, and you just can't schlep them around on a bike. And then about 3 years ago, I've been thinking I probably should get back into cycling because, I'm pretty much paperless. I could do it. And I was just putting it off and off. And actually lockdown has really, if you want to try and reduce your risk, one of the things is just not getting on public transport. So cycling has been a thing that I've come to enjoy again. Although it's, I've realized that cycling has been one of those things that hasn't changed who I am, but it's revealed who I am. But I'm basically a bit of a geek, and I really love learning about different cycle routes and cycle. I take the CS1 and the Q2 and all this rubbish. But it's an easy way of having that kind of an opportunity to be a bit more freer without feeling that you're being at risk. Occasionally, when I do get the chance, I like reading, but it doesn't happen all the time. One of the most important things I was taught as a very, very junior tenant, and I've just been taken on, was to always have lots of holidays. And I think I do have a reputation, which I'm now publicly declaring, as being the Judith Chalmers of Chambers. And play hard, work hard. So, always have a holiday booked so you can look forward to something.
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you.
But I think the problem with the lockdown has been, it's the oppressiveness of emails. Because I think there's this kind of omnipresence, you're always at work. And, somebody said to me, a very good friend in Chambers said, it's not working from home, it's living at work. It's 24/7. So
yes,
my mum said to me, at least you're not having to, step into Chambers, and get the tube or the train or the bus. And I was like, but actually that was my kind of decompression time. I could listen to a podcast, I could read a book.
Yes.
I could just switch off. I'd have half an hour of just respite, and on the way home as well. And now actually it's like bam, 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 emails. So I think the bar was doing quite well actually just before lockdown about trying to have wellbeing officers in chambers, have wellbeing policies. But I think lockdown's really kind of disrupted that and not really struck a right balance. I don't know any barristers who would say it's been easy in lockdown. It's been pretty hard. And, it's even harder if you've got family and dependents.
Absolutely.
So I think exercise is probably my key kind of decompressor.
Well, I've been doing this 5K every day to raise awareness for male suicides during the lockdown. And that's really the first time. I mean, I do yoga here and there, but the first time I'm actually out in the rain every day before work starts, it's killing me. I think the idea of a dog is going to be short-lived when we get one. So Andrew, I can see the large bookshelf behind you. They're not all legal books.
No.
And so I know you're a keen reader, and, Women in Law, we've got a book club, and but it's hard reading for pleasure. So I wanted to ask you, who is your favourite author, or indeed, what is your favourite book and why?
I go through periods of reading lots of books and then no books at all.
Yeah.
I'm in one of those phases at the moment where it's just been really busy. But I think it'd be difficult to have one. But I think one of the most recent books, not that recent, but one of the books, say in the last 5 years, has had a real impact. I think it's Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's a really fascinating book. It's a bit of a love story.
Yeah.
It's about immigration, about migration, about racism, about cultural clashes. And actually, it's one of those books that's so prescient because where we are currently with the social and political climate, there are a lot of issues in that book that are relevant. And I think she's just a beautiful writer. I think if I was going to select a legal book, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but To Kill a Mockingbird, it was a story that I was familiar with as a kid because my mum first knew of it as a film in Jamaica in the 60s with Gregory Peck.
Oh, wonderful.
So I knew of the film. I don't think I'd seen it, but I remember mum talking about it and, the kind of about justice and about inequality and fairness. And I think, one of the things that I think is quite important that comes out from that is, when Attica says to Scout, you never really understand a person until you consider the things from their point of view and until you've walked in their skin or, seen things from their perspective, which is basically what we do. So I suppose that's my kind of cliche law book, if I was to have one. And if I was to have a third, if I was allowed one.
Okay, I'll let you. I think there's only you and Leslie Thomas, perhaps, I've allowed a third.
It's a bit like Desert Island Discs.
Yes.
Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson is a fantastic book. I've not actually seen the film. A good friend of mine bought me the book a few years ago. And again, it's all about justice, all about what we do, but it's about people who are on death row and an organisation called Equal Justice, I think, or the Equal Justice Initiative, trying to basically get stays of execution at the very last minute. And it's a fascinating book, but all about the inequality of the justice system in the US, which is depressing to say the least.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And what about fictional lawyers? You mentioned Atticus. Is he your ultimate? I know lots of people say that he's one of mine, but who is your favorite fictional lawyer, either from television or indeed, as a character? I'm trying to think of some of the people that we've had. Cousin Vinny, I think View from the North, Jamie Hamilton said. Other people have said Maxine Peake, who's, of course, a Manchester wonderful woman. Who's if you had a favourite fictional lawyer?
I thought long and hard about this. I'm actually one of those lawyers who doesn't actually mind law I mean, I know often they're so inaccurate, whether it's American dramas or English dramas, but they are quite funny to watch. And actually, the lawyer who I'd probably go for is probably a bit of a wild card. But Diane Lockhart from The Good Wife and The Good Fight is just brilliant. I mean, some of the things that she does are completely unethical, and the SRA or the Bar Standards Board will have a field day. But I just love her spirit. I mean, I think she's just a great character. I actually think The Good Wife and The Good Fight are really easy legal dramas to watch, which I quite like.
Yes, actually, good choice, because I do love The Good Wife and The Good Fight. I've not watched all of it, but I think that's a fantastic choice.
Controversially, I think it might be better than The Good Wife.
Oh,
just saying.
I need to watch it again. We'll have to ask people to comment. So, Andrew, you've been at the bar for quite some time now. And I wonder for younger people listening, 30,000 people listen to this podcast. Yeah, I know. Can you believe it? And I just wonder really, what advice would you have for perhaps entrance to the law and maybe longevity? Because we know the attrition rates are not entirely brilliant, especially in terms of gender, for women at publicly funded bar, for example. So I wonder if you had maybe 3 short tips of the entrance to the bar, maybe ways they can stand out, and maybe any advice for longevity at the bar or in the profession,
I mean, the biggest tip is, I suppose, and I think that I was always told is that, the biggest thing you can offer to the legal profession, in fact, to any job, is you, because you are unique. Putting your best foot forward, that your own experiences can shape a case, I think, sometimes because of, your life experience. So I think just being you is critical. A more practical one is mentorship. I think it's really important that people use mentoring as a resource, actually. And it works both ways, because it's not just young people and students who are going through bar school or through law school and then bar school and then through pupillage and tenancy. Actually, it's during the course of your career. Like, people who are senior juniors should have mentors for their next stages.
Yes.
And I think that's actually probably one of the ways in which you tackle or address issues of retention, because, particularly say for women, actually, I think, if you've got a female silk who has had periods of maternity leave and come back and taken silk and so forth, that's somebody who's is going to be an excellent role model and a mentor for somebody who's 10 years junior. Absolutely. So things like that, I think, are really important. And I suppose the third one, it's difficult actually in one sense, because I try and think of the things that would have helped me back then.
Yes.
And I suppose if you've got mentorships, if you're looking at mentoring and just being yourself, I think the third one would probably be resilience. And then that sounds an odd one, but actually you do get a lot of knockbacks on this journey.
And rejection. You shared about Cambridge right at the beginning, when you then had to go through the whole thing. How does one pick up themselves? And I've had loads of rejections. Crikey, that's a whole book in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. And you've got to have that resilience, I think. Again, I don't want to say that, you've got to be producing robotic kind of type responses. You can't be yourself. But you've got to have that sense of, actually, you get knocked down and you get up again.
Absolutely. We need to try and get the rights for that soundtrack, because I love it. Those are 3 fantastic advice. Andrew, what's next? You're great on Twitter. You're doing well at the bar. You're not a parent yet. I look forward to that. You might have to ditch your personal trainer then to afford a childcare as and when that happens. And I see Lord Reed's target, if you like, to try and get some, increase the diversity in the senior positions of the judiciary, including the Supreme Court. And his target is within 6 years. And so I'm wondering, have you thought about judicial appointments? Taking silk. You're a fantastic role model. But I wonder if you've considered what's next and thought about how to carry on being a role model. I know that you've not thought about this, but I want you to throw your hat in the same way as every time I go to court, people ask me, throw your hat in the ring. Is that something you would consider?
Definitely. I mean, I'm certainly not closed to either. I think it's really interesting, actually. I think if you'd asked me 6 years ago, I would have said for both, you're absolutely crazy. But actually, I think with encouragement and support from very supportive colleagues in chambers who seem to recognise some potential, there is that sense of actually, perhaps I could. And I've not, applied for anything judicial so far, but certainly I'm the next couple of years maybe I would. I think actually, again, it goes back to my resilience point earlier, because actually, if you don't throw your hat in the ring, you don't know. And actually, you might take more than one attempt. So you better start sooner rather than later. I suppose it's probably the same for silk. At the moment, I've got a very privileged, very lucky to have a practice that I like. Taking silk can change those kind of things. But again, it's something I'm not opposed to. And again, it's that encouragement that I'm very lucky to have people who seem to just taken me on as their mentee, I suppose, even as a jobbing junior barrister. That there are people who are very supportive, actually, and very encouraging. So, as I say, I'm not close to it, and so yeah, we'll see what happens.
Fantastic. Well, I'll be coming back to you on that one. You remember, you can't be what you don't see, and your colleague is spot on about that, and so are you. And I say that all the time. Andrew Powell, thank you so much for coming to talk to me on here. And I want to just ask you one final question, if I may be so bold, and it's about Twitter and the social media. Yes. Warning others off it and so on. And so many of my guests on here are so good on it and are used to it. So I wonder for you, when did you become comfortable with using Twitter, whether it's talking about, the Kylie wine, or actually using it as a platform to talk about the law, perhaps in a way that the secret barrister, who of course has been a guest on here, does?
I suppose probably in the last 3 or 4 years, I felt a bit more confident to say things, because I think I don't think I shy away from things that I don't like or don't approve of politically, that I will say things, but within a professional way.
Absolutely.
But I think, for example, the secret barrister, they have a very good approach at tackling things. I think the way in which they do it is one which is a public service.
Yes, but of course they're secret.
Well, they are, but part of their secrecy allows them to do that. But Joanna Hardy, who is just wonderful on Twitter, because she has she's hilarious, and also tackles really critical things. And I think, not that I'm trying to emanate her, because I don't think it'd be possible. Yeah. And similarly, Alexandra Wilson also has a similar kind of platform of being able to be, using her followership to talk about things like racism and diversity. It's a question actually that somebody asked me about a year ago, actually, on a panel that I was on with the secret barrister at the bar conference, where the question was,
I was there. Yeah.
The question was, what can it be good or bad? And I think, of course there can be bad things, because the last thing you want to be is somebody who tweets something and then you end up on the front of a national newspaper. But I think it's a good service that you can attract a lot of people. And if for example, we are keen to ensure that there are more people who are representative of society who are coming to the bar, Twitter's a really easy device, a really easy tool to use, because you've got young people who are at university or at school age who are on it, and so they see it. So I mean, it's an easy tool as long as it's used within reason. I think it's a good way of reaching out to people. I think I was ambivalent about it initially, and now I feel, as you said, I do feel more comfortable about it.
Yeah, spot on. Andrew Powell, thank you very much for talking law with me, Sally Penni.
Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you again for listening to Talking Law with me, Sally Penni, MBE. You can find me on Twitter at SallyPenny1. Please do take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and do subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you to Wesleyan Financial Services for supporting this episode, and thank you also to Sam Walker and our production team at What Goes On Media. Bye-bye for now.